Hey Matt, what am I?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I'm a post message man. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Off by Two with Matt and Bentley. And we're here today to talk about post message.
Yeah,
Matt, how are you doing?
it's good to be back. This is an old subject for you and I. I think something that we get
Grade
into every
school.
now and then. But
Yeah, grade school friends. You, me, post message.
I love the name post message, right? Like, yeah, just evokes this concept of yeah, you're in grade school and you have a pen pal, right? Like, and you post your messages back and forth to your pen pal. Did you have a pen pal?
I don't think I had a pen pal.
Uh, I think I had a pen pal, but like all students, I did very bad, right? You write one letter and then
Yeah.
never reply.
All right, so post message. The reason that we know about post message and are familiar with it is because we deal with a lot of iframes on the Trello platform, building power ups, and post message is a great way for iframes for a window to communicate with an iframe. So that is our starting point. I know that you can post a message to an iframe. Want to start filling in some of the pieces in between?
I mean, what is an iframe but a window, right?
Fair.
Um,
Right.
which it is a window and inside of another window.
Right.
So yeah, you mentioned that we go way back. Um, Power ups, man, they're getting up there in years. I think power ups are starting to enter like grade school.
Yeah, I think they're
Um,
in kindergarten.
they're in kindergarten now. Um, you likely remember, and maybe some of our viewers remember the weather power up that we wrote. Not on off by two. This was, I think, pre off by 2 days. Um, where we made it so that our little power up could tell you the weather as long as a card had a location data. So like Denali here has Denali National Park, and the power up here is providing the weather information. Um, -0 is kind of probably an underappreciated temperature around here. It's
Very
slightly
chilly.
colder than 0, I think is the. But how? Yeah, like so. I think what we're looking at here. How does this relate to post message? These things, because these guys aren't iframes, right? Like these are just live just in the DOM. Well, iframes live in the DOM, but they live inside of this particular Trello window.
I assume that it's because we Trello are reaching out to this power ups connector URL, which is in fact loaded in an iframe, and there needs to be some sort of conversation between the two of those. And in particular, we need to let it know, it being the power ups connector URL, when some code needs to be run. And I believe that under the hood, we're doing that all via post message.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of our, maybe one of our favorite kinds of iframes, the hidden iframe, right? Where it's there, you just can't see it, and you got to trust us, right? So yeah, power ups in general, right, loaded as an iframe, as a hidden iframe. That's kind of that iframe connector URL you're talking about, and then we talk back and forth via post message, or this thing called post message, which, unlike what we said earlier, does not involve the postman sending a pen pal letter between Trello and your particular power up. But this is, of course, right, power ups are far from the only thing to use post message, and also far from the first thing to use post message. I think post message predates power ups by a very long time. And so let's take a look at a couple of things before we go too far here. So we've got our favorite documentation website here pulled up,
I guess
MDN, to look at post message. And I'm not going to look at too much here other than perhaps point out that if you were interested in learning a bit more about post message beyond what Bentley and I can convey in a little video, it's probably a good place to start, right?
Yeah, and I will say, like, off the bat, one of the things I've always enjoyed about post message is the method signature is very simple. It is not complicated. Hard to get too wrong.
Oh, I like that. It's an excellent segue, right? Hard to get too wrong. This like reminds me of our other video on secrets and how easy it is to mess up a secret, right? To expose a secret. And I feel like post message has a similar kind of vibe to it in that it's very easy to use, but also maybe a bit too easy to go wrong with, right? And so much so, and this is perhaps one of my favorite lines on any MDN page, which is very much in the vein of the safest code, right? The only bug-free code is the code that's not even written, right? It's very much in that vein, right? Or the safest code is the code that does not exist. So it's telling you very explicitly, right? It's like if you don't, if you're not using post message or you're not expecting to message with other sites, then do not listen to message events, right? Like don't even open yourself up to be messaged from other people, right?
Right. And in particular, I realized I started with talking about iframes, and you very rightfully rolled back a little bit, and that is that you can use post message for iframes, or just if a new window has been opened, it doesn't
Right.
have to
Yeah.
actually be
Different
iframe
tabs.
in the
Yeah.
DOM.
Different
Yeah,
tabs can talk back and forth, different windows. Yep. Yeah. As long as you've got a reference to the window object that you want to talk to, you can send that thing a message. Now, of course, if it doesn't expect you to be sending a message, hopefully it's not even listening, right? So don't just expect to send a message to something and expect it to do something with it. It needs to be listening for your message and then know what to do with it. And of course, we're not going to go into this, but if you're digging into this, I recommend you read this whole paragraph, maybe twice, and make sure that you kind of understand, like, yeah, you could get messages from anybody, right? That could be a friend or a foe. Make sure you're taking the right precautions, right? Like, it's nice and easy to use. Anybody can send you a message. Know that anybody can send you a message. Right. I classic evil.example.com. Usually I use evil.com, but I guess evil.example.com is probably more in keeping with the MDN docs. And the other thing, we talked about Windows, but it's not just Windows, right? That where post message is kind of relevant. I have here the node documentation. If you're familiar, are you familiar with, like, when you use a node, if you like spawning child processes or forking additional processes, things like that, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes those different processes need to talk back and forth, right?
Can you use post message because it's JavaScript?
I don't know if it's necessarily because it's JavaScript, the language, so much as, yes, the node. I guess we're talking about IPC at this point, right? Inter-process communication, I hope.
Right.
Done right. And yeah, in Node, your IPC here takes a very similar approach to post message insofar as you literally call, child process dot post message, send the message. The only difference, as far as I remember, it comes down to serialization, right? How does the message that you send get serialized? And I think by default, it will serialize it the same way that the browser does. But as you can kind of see here, you can do other serialization approaches, which will serialize things a little bit differently. Right, a great example of this, if we were to go back to right, this concept here of, like, yeah, we're sending this data. You wouldn't want to, or I mean, maybe you'd want to, but you probably shouldn't serialize a function, right, across the Y, right? Like, take a message that has a function and then run that function, right?
Right.
That would bring us straight into cross-site scripting, right, where somebody else is running some code on your domain.
Right.
And partly to protect you there, if somebody tries to message you a function, the browser will not serialize that function across. So you can't directly message a function, but you can kind of get close. But I think that's actually a good segue into us talking a little bit about, like, simpler practical use cases, right? You don't have to write an entire Power framework in order to make some good use of being able to post message between some different windows. So what are we looking at here? Like, and where in this page, right, are we kind of doing post message?
Yeah. So this is our embedded cards where we draw in an iframe, or you can throw one of these iframes on your page and we'll render the Trello card there. And a great example of like the naive approach of handling things in this is, let's say, the window resizes.
So here's our iframe that you mentioned, right? So we've got our, let's scroll down so we can see it highlight. Yep, iframe source, lovely. Well, I've even got a breakpoint. I'm getting slightly ahead of you.
Right. So like bad developer Bentley. If we needed to resize this iframe, you could imagine the very naive approach would be what you just said, and that is to send via post message some JavaScript for the iframe to execute to resize. Window dot I don't know, window dot height maybe equals something. But as you just mentioned, we don't want to actually do that, and so we probably actually want to have some sort of API in a very loose sense of an agreed upon set of things coming across and what the responses should be taken on the other side. So I'm guessing that we send some sort of resize message, and then our iframe knows how to interpret that correctly.
Yeah, you can kind of, so I suppose the first thing that's relevant to know, right, is that the code, all this stuff that lives inside of the iframe cannot actually impact the iframe itself, right? Because the iframe element lives, on a separate domain, totally different than all the stuff that's running inside of the iframe. And that's where this like barrier comes from, right? Is like you might want to change the height of the iframe. And certainly the stuff inside would be the one that kind of knows, right? Like it's the stuff inside that's rendering the card. It knows how tall that it wants to be. And yet it has no direct way, right? It has no direct way to say, oh yeah, the height of my iframe should be, in this case, 335. So it has to do that kind of indirectly. To your point, right? Post message seems like a nice little indirect gap between those two. So we're going to switch here and we're going to look briefly at a little bit of code. And the code that we're looking at here this is actually the code behind what we just looked at, right? The embedded cards. And we're going to start with the parent page. So in this case, it's the docs page that we embedded the cards in. And that page brings in our script called embed.js. And embed.js has this code in here for Trello cards. So you can see, all right, when you instantiate the Trello card, and I'm going to make this even bigger because why not? It's not that much code here. It's going to set up this little kind of event handler saying, all right, if I get a message, what should I do with that message? And then importantly, right, this is what MDN says, only add this if you expect to get messages. And we're going to say, hey, okay, I do expect to get messages. Run this function every time I get a message. Right. And then another little, MDN warning here, right, is one of the best ways to kind of establish trust when you're getting and receiving these messages is to look at the origin that it's coming from, right? So that's great here because we always know that this origin should be Trello.com. And if it's not Trello.com, then we probably don't care about it, right? We only expect Trello.com to be telling us that it wants to resize or do things. Therefore, if it's not Trello.com, let's just ignore it. That seems like a nice, safe way to go. But yeah, this is what you said, right? Like, okay, maybe we'll send something like a resize command, and we'll ask the parent page to change the height. So this is exactly what this is doing. It's saying, hey, if you sent me a resize command, in this case, truly it's just the string resize as the command here, then I'm going to go ahead and see if I have the element inside the DOM, and if you do, and you've given me a height, so we'll look at what the inside the iframe is doing in a second, but we know that the parent's getting this resize command and it's hopefully getting this options height thing. And if it does, then great. It'll go ahead and call and say, all right, time to resize this thing. At which we're going to go all the way into that, but essentially all that's really going to do is set the height and the width of the iframe, which we can do on this page because it's our iframe. We control it. All right, so this is one half of the puzzle, right? Think of this as like this is the receiver. So if you and I are pen pals, we just looked at, and I sent you a message, we just looked at your side. Now, if we look at the other side, now we're looking at card JSX. This is, in fact, the card that gets rendered. It has this helpful little method here called message parent. And it does its own little check here to be like, okay, am I in fact being displayed in an iframe, and I have a reference to the window that I want to talk to? And again, here's that similar check, right? Of like, do I know the origin that I want to be talking to? And hopefully it's not just wild card, right? Anybody. So as long as I know who I want to talk to, then great. I'm going to go ahead and talk. In this case, there's nothing too secret being sent here, right? We're just saying, hey, I was 300 pixels. I'd like to be 400 pixels high. But this same kind of approach applies if you are sending a little bit more sensitive stuff, right? Think of power ups. They send sensitive stuff back and forth all the time. And you don't want that kind of getting into the wrong hands. You want to know that you're sending it to who you think you're sending it to, et cetera. So here's the resize command on the other side, right? This is the sender side. So if I was writing my pen pal note to Bentley, this is what my pen pal note looks like. Looks like a JavaScript object with the command is the resize. I'm telling you which card. I'm telling it the height that I want to be. And then I send it off. I let the carrier come. In this case, the carrier is the browser, and it's going to send that JavaScript object. It's going to serialize it, send it across the wire to window.parent. And there we go. That will make this guy change its size. So and that's all the code that I said we would just look at a little bit of code. That's all the code we're going to look at.
So thinking through this and kind of thinking around it, an alternative approach could be having a source of truth elsewhere, like doing like WebSockets would be a way to keep something in sync between two windows.
Yeah, that's expensive, of course. Because to have a WebSocket means that you have some backend infrastructure, right? That's both keeping open, right? That's the expensive part, of course, of WebSockets is holding connections open, right? Each connection that you hold open has some memory overhead. So if you're doing that a lot, right? If you're Trello or Slack or anybody that's got a lot of WebSockets open, you're familiar with kind of having some pretty big infrastructure in order to do that. There are other options though, like WebSockets is a good one. I think WebRTC. Have you heard of that? Like
okay.
WebRTC, I know you can set up. You could have a server for that, but I believe you can also set up WebRTC similarly, kind of just post message without needing a backend in the thing. I think the thing to look at, if that interests you, the thing to look up, I believe, is called WebRTC data channels, and you could use a WebRTC data channel in order to accomplish a fairly similar thing.
Yeah, I guess one of the neat things about post message is that it doesn't actually require like internet connectivity, or you can actually install just with two vanilla HTML pages on your local machine and never be connected to the internet or need to talk to a server. Yeah,
and it's faster as a result, right? It means that when you think about the path that this message is traversing, it's never going out onto the network. The browser is truly serializing this data and just handing it over to a different process, right? It is, we talked about IPC in the context of Node, where it's obviously IPC, but it's kind of IPC here, right? Like most browsers segment all their different windows and stuff in different different threads is the word I'm looking for here, probably. And so really, I mean, that's kind of what's going right. So I've got these different threads floating around. I want to get a message from this one to this one. Got to serialize it and hand it over to that guy and let him do with it what he wants.
I wonder if there are standards and rules and how delivery, successful delivery is handled with post message, right? That's kind of one of the big chunks of WebSockets or any sort of real-time communication is ensuring message delivery and retry and everything. I wonder if that's a standard within post message, or whether each browser handles it differently. Or
well, I think that it's helpful to think of post message in kind of like a similar sense that you might think of like UDP versus TCP, right? Where like UDP, right, is like, all right, I want to send some data, but like, if it gets there, whatever order it gets there in, like whatever, right? Like there's nothing built into the protocol to help you there, right? Like, whereas TCP at the protocol layer will say, all right, I'm going to add extra stuff for you in order to ensure delivery, in order to ensure like order guarantees, things like that. And so post message much more in the UDP variety, right? It's like send it, and presumably more reliable than UDP, since you're not actually going out onto the network. You're mostly just IPC here. But people build on top of that extra logic in order to do things like a classic example, right, is if you want to reply to a message that you got, well, you kind of have to build into your own messaging, kind of into your own infrastructure, some concept of what message is being replied to, right? So Trello has done this with power-ups, right? Trello has a layer kind of above post message where we add on a bunch of data to the messages being sent back and forth, so that when a message is replying or coming back and forth, we can know which message is being replied to, and order of messages, things like that. I think you and I looked a while back. I think like PayPal or something has like post message robot. Like I think there's a library that other folks have developed to layer on a little bit of this extra complexity on top of post message to give you the ability to kind of use it a bit more like as that TCP style. Like, yeah, okay, I know I can talk back and forth and have some of that complexity handled for me, and not have to think about which message am I replying, who am I replying to, which message am I replying to, did it go through, things like that.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Well, I feel like that is the end of the thread for us on post message.
Yeah, and we're
I received your last message.
I wrote post message, so we're not the end all be all there, but hopefully, right, some of this is giving you direction in terms of places to look and explore to learn more.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, Matt, thanks for a few minutes of your time today. Until next time.
Yeah, and always feel free to chime in with topics that you'd like to see explored or hear more about, and we could use the ideas.
Yeah, definitely. Until next time.
All right, signing off.